Let's take you to another top story. And a number of people killed in Friday's earthquake in Morocco has now risen to almost 2,800. Survivors are living in tents after their homes were destroyed. Some are still searching for loved ones trapped under the rubble. Now, the army and aid agencies have reached some remote villages in the high Atlas Mountains. Many roads there became blocked by rubble, hampering relief efforts. Workers are rushing to reopen those roads leading to isolated communities. And the Moroccan military has been delivering aid to those hard-to-reach areas by air. The army says it's distributing food, tents and blankets on the ground. Let's cross over to Jonah Hull, our correspondent, who's following events for us near the Atlas Mountains there, near the epicentre as well, in Morocco. Jonah, just describe to us where you are and what you can see just right now.
Well, it's been a pretty dramatic day here in the foothills of the Atlas Mountains, in some of the worst affected areas after Friday night's quake, if not necessarily the most remote. The earthquake zone extends much deeper into the mountains than this. I'm in the village of Urigan. It's not far from the local centre of Mourad Brahim, and devastated, of course. And as we've been here, we've watched 3 days in, a pretty intensive aid and relief effort really get underway today. You can see tents behind me there, piles of aid that's been delivered, much of it by volunteers, I have to say, rather than by the government. And we've seen, forgive me, I'm getting breakup, and we've watched a search and rescue effort get underway to some extent. I say to some extent because whilst we've seen sniffer dogs searching for signs of life, they haven't found any, and so we've watched heavy digging equipment pulling the rubble aside and searching for bodies, which sadly they have found. 3 additional victims, adding to the toll of this very small community here. Here's my report. In remote communities across the earthquake zone, scenes of pain are unrelenting. This woman has just learned that the body of her nephew has been recovered, the 6th member known to have died in a family of 7. After hours of digging, the remains of 6-year-old Badr Iba are rushed from the scene. He died where he went to sleep on Friday night. A crowd forming as his body was hurried away by rescue workers beneath a blanket to be delivered to his extended family for burial. Only a 13-year-old brother remains alive. Ismail Otasaft lived next door to that family in a house that no longer exists and lost 3 family members of his own.
We've heard about earthquakes before, but they always happen somewhere else. Now that it happens to us, we understand. And when it happened, all I could do is pray.
He watches as the search goes on. A mother and her daughter are believed to be beneath the rubble, and sniffer dogs belonging to a volunteer French unit detect no sign of life. It's a slow, delicate business, this, breaking through the rubble with what is an incredibly heavy piece of equipment, but carefully so as not to further collapse the structure so that they can retrieve the bodies buried beneath. Dozens of people are known to have died in this small community alone. The poorest here are farmers. The better off guide tourists on tranquil mountain hikes. Now military helicopters soar overhead, delivering aid to harder to reach places. The occasional ambulance screams past makeshift camps. And earth-moving equipment is guided by the army deeper into the mountains. Watching them pass is Abdelkabir Atibidari, bearing injuries sustained in the quake, keeping vigil at the remains of the mud brick home where his father and brother were among the dead. If they want to bulldoze my house, he tells me, they'll have to take me with it.
What am I supposed to do? We leave it to God. Only he knows what to do. If he wants to take us too, he is welcome. It's better than living like this.
Later, it becomes clear that Abdel Kabir had spoken in shock or despair. He has 2 children to care for still and a wife, and despite the pain that he and others can scarcely believe, let alone come to terms with, life must go on. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera, in the Atlas Mountains, Morocco. Well, search and rescue operations here in Ouragan certainly are now over. This is purely a relief effort. They're simply not looking for anyone else. No one else is missing. And after those 3 bodies recovered today, the death toll in this small community close to 50. And this is a scene replicated all over this earthquake zone, of course. Down on the hillside there are 2 other big diggers being deployed now instead to dig mass graves. But that doesn't mean that hope is lost everywhere, because adding to the drama here this afternoon was the arrival of a man on the back of a flatbed truck. He'd been pulled from the rubble, we are told, after 3 days this afternoon, much deeper inside the earthquake zone, high in the mountains there. Allegedly, local villagers had carried him by hand for many kilometers before he'd been transferred onto the back of that truck, delivered here where there are medics, and then put into an ambulance and taken to hospital. So there is some hope, and speaking to those sniffer dog teams, a French volunteer unit, they reminded us that they pulled people alive from the rubble in Turkey earlier this year after 8 days. But that hope is dwindling fast, even as convoys of heavy equipment, aid and relief continue to pass by us here, deeper into the earthquake zone.
Jonah Hull for us there in Ouragan. Thanks so much, Jonah. Survivors are living in tents after their homes were destroyed. Some are still searching for loved ones trapped under the rubble. Mohammed Val reports.
For the 3rd consecutive day, a massive search and rescue operation to find earthquake survivors. The Eagle community in the Wirgan area is only 2.5 kilometers from the epicenter of the devastating tremor on Friday. It struck El Haouz province south of Marrakesh, where the largest number of victims are. Teams from the Royal Armed Forces are leading the operation. Some victims have been rescued from under the rubble. The logistical challenges are enormous. Bodies are piling up near graves in the heat, with reports that Moroccan authorities have instructed the bereaved not to bury their loved ones until death certificates are issued.
Moroccan authorities have wronged us, sir. They haven't allowed us to bury our dead. They're rotting. They haven't provided us any help. They haven't let us do anything.
With the number of dead, injured and missing continuing to rise, the worst affected villages in the High Atlas region present the biggest challenge. The rugged mountain range hosts some of the remotest residential areas. Moroccans across the country are showing solidarity. Volunteers from northern Morocco distributed food, blankets and clothes to villagers. Many other regions are launching similar campaigns to deliver to earthquake victims. Military helicopters are flying aid to isolated communities near the epicenter. Medical and nursing staff have been recruited to assist them. A Moroccan government spokesman says the priority is to reach stranded people.
The main challenge is the rocks that fall down and block roads, but we use airplanes to reach affected areas.
He says it's difficult to estimate how many people are trapped under the rubble. Morocco hasn't seen an earthquake like this one since the Agadir quake in 1960, which killed more than 12,000 people. Mohammed Val, Al Jazeera.
Well, we have a team of correspondents covering the disaster. In a moment, we'll hear from Nicholas Hack in the city of Marrakesh, where temporary camps have been set up to house those that are displaced. But first, Hashim Albara is near the epicenter of the quake up in the Atlas Mountains.
You see the mountains here, all these mountains, beyond them is the epicenter of the earthquake. And there is only one way, which is here, that drives from south towards the villages. This is why you can see those excavators, earth diggers, along with some military vehicles there. But it's not enough. And this explains why the helicopters are airlifting aid to the people affected. But because we're talking about many desolate villages in the mountains, it is extremely difficult, and this explains the many people that would tell you that we need more aid to be trickling in to those areas. And this is something which is going to continue to pose huge challenges for the authorities, which is basically the need, first of all, to continue sending rescue teams, airlifting them to those areas. At the same time, you have to airlift aid to those areas, bring the rescuers back, bring the injured back to Marrakesh, and continue the operation for as long as it takes. At the same time, supplies, and this is what people need. They want tents, mattresses, blankets, food, medicine, as soon as possible. And this explains why you're seeing more and more charities, NGOs, government institutions, and particularly the army and the gendarmerie stepping in and trying to deliver more and more aid to those affected areas.
Nicholas Sack is at a temporary camp in Marrakesh.
This is a neighborhood in Marrakesh, a stadium, normally a football pitch, but look at it now. It's turned into a crisis management center. Last night, 50 families were sent here. We saw actually a bus come to that place, that square where we were earlier on, to pick up some of the worst affected families. So the people that you see right behind me will not be able to return to their homes inside the Medina because it is utter destruction. There are 800 more families expected tonight that will sleep here. We expect also, the authorities have told us that nurses and doctors are coming. You can see they're bringing food, sandwiches. And what's incredible to see in the face of this calamity is the resilience of the Moroccan people. All of the people that you see working inside this shelter are volunteers. We met students, people that work for the city, have joined forces to try to give some relief to those that need it the most, because there is so much work ahead for the authorities in Morocco.
Bushra Gutbach lives in Marrakesh. She's helping distribute food to affected villages, and she explains why she decided to get involved.
I was happy enough to still have a roof over my head. Simply as that. We felt the earthquake. The whole building where I live moved, but we still have a roof over our head. It didn't collapse. I could be that person that was now with my daughter and my husband under a rocks, waiting for somebody to help me. So I could not just stay and go on with my life. We had to help, so I get it. We as friends gathered together, and without any plan, we went to the groceries and keep calling people who knew people where they needed some help, where there was nobody yet. While getting there, we saw a lot of military camps already set up base tents, already gave them everything they need. So we kept going further on places where there was no help yet. That's how we got to the village in Nedden. That's where we went yesterday. And today we're gathered again to help other villages in need. So the force is because we are happy enough that we are still alive, and not blessed enough that we are not injured, that our kids are not injured.